my friends at UCLA. Before I talk about tonight's films, I'd like to introduce some friends and family. I'm here with my dear friend Victoria Mature, daughter of Victor and close friend who came up from San Diego. And I think Kate Edelman Johnson, who is the producer of the musical Cagney, daughter of the famed producer Lou Edelman, who produced several Curtiz films, including The Walking Dead while at Warner's. I believe Kate, I don't know if she made it here, but if you're here, Kate, thank you for coming. And last but certainly not least, my wife, Gemma. Okay, it really feels wonderful. I feel like I'm back home. What did Coolidge say? A return to normalcy, as it were. It really is wonderful to return to this venue that has a lot of significance to me personally. In addition to the many outstanding screenings that have been held here that are beyond counting, I've had the pleasure to introduce a number of special screenings here. Burt Lancaster's Centennial Celebration in 2013, River of No Return with the late great producer Stanley Rubin, the Film Noir Foundation UCLA restoration of the movie Cry Danger with my pal Dick Erdman. But no event was more significant than the 3-month Michael Curtiz retrospective that UCLA generously allowed me to host and program in 2018 when the hardcover of my book on Michael Curtiz first came out. It was during that film series that we screened the 2 films we would be seeing tonight, Mystery of the Wax Museum and Dr. X. And I believe they were on a triple bill, with the last film being Curtiz's The Kennel Murder Case. But the first 2 films, however delightful and appreciated when we showed them in 2018, neither look nor sound what we will see here tonight. Wax Museum and Dr. X have been fully restored, and what you will see and hear tonight was the way audiences 90 years ago thrilled to see them on the big screen. In fact, you're going to hear some sounds that were not heard in the theaters in those days. They were heard on the set of the films by the cast, the crew, Michael Curtiz, etc. Because in 1933, the speakers in movie theaters did not have the sound reproductive quality to make some of what you hear tonight. So tonight, you're going to hear the squeaking of Lionel Atwill's wheelchair, or the heavy breathing of the morgue monster. So just think about that. You're going to be hearing sounds that were heard by a finite group of people that saw these movies when they were made almost 90 years ago. And I think that's pretty special. I'd like to talk briefly a little bit about the restoration and then a bit about the first movie, Mystery of the Wax Museum. First off, I'd like to echo May in saying we would not be sitting here watching these restorations if it wasn't for UCLA's recently retired head restorationist, Scott McQueen. Both of these films, that's right, both of these films were real passion projects for Scott, and having worked with him closely over the years on several Film Noir Foundation funded restorations, I can truthfully say that Scott treated every restoration project as if it was Metropolis or The Red Shoes. The other thing is Scott cherished both of these films from a young age. As a teenager, he actually interviewed one of the Wax Museum stars, Glenda Farrell, who was on his paper route in New York City. And then he actually both interviewed and escorted Fay Wray to a screening of the so-called Jack Warner discovered print in New York City at the Wax Museum. And Scott actually tape recorded these discussions with these screen legends, and both of those recordings are on the Blu-ray discs that were released by the Warner Archive Collection. So thanks to Scott McQueen, who is retired, and I just got an email from him. He's hanging up his movie poster collection in his new home near Sacramento. So thanks, Scott, for all of that. The Wax Museum was restored using the 1933 Nitrate Print that was discovered in 1969 in Jack Warner's vault, which was a portion of a vault on the lot at Warner Brothers. Jack Warner didn't have a vault and film vault in his house like Al Capone's vault or something like that. There was a second nitrate print that was found in the 2000s by a collector and is now in the Packard Humanities Institute collection. And it was a French print with some subtitling Some reels had sound, some didn't. And although this print had inferior color, the restoration team was able to get lost frames back, including, as May referred to, a line of Glenda Farrell's, which was memorably, "I ask you to keep your trap shut." The Warner print has a splice there, and Scott went through a bunch of Farrell's Warner Brothers films to borrow her words from the 1932 movie Life Begins to fill in that missing dialogue. So this film and Dr. X are really the definition of what I would call a restoration. This was not, we scanned the negative and put it out on Blu-ray. Different story. This is a restoration. A word about two-strip or two-stripe, or it's easier to say two-color Technicolor. What does that really mean? These early Technicolor cameras permitted two exposures to be shot on one piece of film through a prism that split the light into a pair of apertures using two filters, red and green. From a negative, they optically separated the films onto two matrix films, colored them with dye, one red, one green, and then transferred the dyes onto a blank film that had the soundtrack on it. The colors in the original print have held up extremely well after nearly 90 years. However, filming in this early Technicolor process required a lot of light, making it absolutely miserable for the actors, standing under these hot lights on an unventilated soundstage. Lionel Atwill said the incandescent lights, quote, baked his brain and ate up the red corpuscles of his blood. And that sounds like a line taken from one of his horror movies, but that's what he said. Fay Wray also spoke of moving out from under the lights as soon as a shot was concluded because it was so hot. The wax statues and some of the shots in this film melted. So director Michael Curtiz ordered stand-in actors in costume to replicate some of the statues so filming could continue. And of course, you will see some familiar faces. You'll see Fay Wray as Marie Antoinette in this film. Now, the film itself, Mystery of the Wax Museum, was shot beginning on September 26, 1932, a 30-day production schedule, and a then generous budget of $230,000. Director Michael Curtiz's quest for perfection put the film behind schedule rather quickly. He was quoted in the Wax Museum press book as saying, "Odd, unusual camera angles should never be used for their own sake, though the temptation to do so is often great, especially to the man who has the aptitude for thinking of them." In other words, that was Curtiz. He was talking about himself. Of the many people I interviewed for my book, one of them was the actor Jimmy Lydon, who spent a lifetime both in front of and in back of the camera. Jimmy's still with us. I believe he's 97. And Jimmy was directed by Curtiz in the film Life with Father in 1947, and he told me, "Mike was one of the most artistic directors I've ever known. He never picked a setup that was beautifully arranged, and the cameraman never arranged the shot. Mike did, and it was always well thought out. Mike was a very, very artistic man." But he was also a slave driver on this movie. On Saturday, October 15th in 32, he worked the cast and crew till 5 a.m. the next morning, getting 11 scenes done after a superhuman 40 different camera setups. Curtiz at this phase of his career was really like a general foreman in the Warner Brothers film factory, along with a lot of other directors. So consider this. From 1932 to 1935, Michael Curtiz directed 22 feature films in 3 years. Think about that. So after that sinks in, that was only slightly over 12% of his total of 181 films that he made from a career that began in Hungary in 1912 and lasted until he was literally carried off the location of his last film, The Comancheros, in 1961. So Curtiz was a taskmaster, but in a perverse way, he was partially responsible for the formation of the Screen Actors Guild. Fay Wray described Curtiz as steel, part of the camera. She added that she respected his ability, but he wasn't very nice and she didn't like him very much. Which I think sums up many actors' feelings about Michael Curtiz, although I did discover there were a lot of exceptions, such as Doris Day, who in her 90s still referred to me as Mr. Curtiz, John Garfield, Joan Crawford, and Ann Blythe, who is still with us. They both admired him and were very fond of him. Several of the set piece scenes in Wax Museum include a fire sequence that took place on 2 sound stages that was quite dangerous. Curtiz was known for not being shy about putting actors in harm's way, which was quite the style during the 1920s and the 1930s. Hal Moore, who was the director of photography on several of Curtiz's early pictures, in an interview with Leonard Maltin, captured the dichotomous nature of Curtiz's personality, saying, "I liked Mike. He was a brutal son of a bitch. He had no consideration for anybody's feelings, but he was a very kindly guy." So go figure that out. There's also little doubt that Wax Museum was a pre-code picture before the production code was really enforced beginning in mid-June 1934. Drug addiction, forbidden by the code, is openly used, with a character in the film played by Arthur Edmund Carew, central to the plot, being portrayed openly as a drug addict. After mid-June 1934, you didn't see illicit drugs used so thematically until Otto Preminger's Man with a Golden Arm, which was released in the 1950s without an MPAA seal. There's also a neat scene with Fay Wray showing off her lovely gams as she and Glenda Farrell have a candid conversation about romance and marriage. Some of the other notable attributes of the film include the expansive morgue and Wax Museum and climactic lab sets that were designed by the great art director, Anton Grott. The makeup was designed by Purs Westmore, the longtime makeup director at Warner's, and with his family, founder of the House of Westmore Makeup Consortium. Without giving anything away, the climactic scene in the film did have to be shot twice. In addition to Lionel Atwill and Fay Wray, and by the way, there's a great discussion about Fay on the Blu-ray disc that I made with Fay's daughter, Victoria Riskin, about the film and her mother. And I also heartily recommend Vicki Riskin's book about her parents, Fay Wray and Robert Riskin, A Hollywood Memoir. There's also in this film Glenda Farrell and Frank McHugh as a pair of smart aleck reporters and editors, as only Warner Brothers could portray them. Darryl F. Zanuck was head of production, and after Five Star Final in 1931, it seemed as though he couldn't let a film get by him without a smart aleck reporter and an editor barking lines at one another. In fact, Glenda takes on the same role that we'll see Lee Tracy play in Dr. X. And I'll be back after Wax Museum to talk about that film. But for now, let's enjoy this magnificent restoration of an early pre-code Technicolor horror film that set a standard, in my opinion, that other films of its genre would strive to emulate. Mystery of the Wax Museum. Thanks for coming out tonight. Great to see you here at the movies. Thank you.